Hello and welcome back, and if you are new here, welcome, we are very glad to have you here. In today's video we will demonstrate how to upgrade firmware on our DSO 138 oscilloscope. Before we proceed, we will explain what is firmware, and why, sometimes, it is a good idea to update firmware on your device. So, let's get started. In general, firmware is a piece of software, embedded into device, by manufacturer. It provides a low-level control of device. Most known example of firmware is UEFI, a control program executed every time we power up computer or laptop. It is responsible for starting up computer, providing basic tools for hardware configuration, adjusting various settings, for example, date and time, choosing boot device containing operating system or installation media, memory and graphics card configuration, various I/O settings and etc. The reason we sometimes find ourselves in need of updating firmware is when manufacturer of device issues a new version. These new versions are called revisions. This happens when manufacturer wants to add some new features and functionalities to a device, or when error is discovered, and new version of firmware is issued to fix error, or address some other issue reported by users and testers, latter being more common reason for new version of firmware. In case of our oscilloscope, there are 5 versions of firmware. The official release from 2014. This firmware has marked 036. During next 2 years, there have been 3 additional revisions, marked 040, 050, and 060. As of October 2016, the latest version is marked 061. After this, there has been no official revisions of firmware. Each of those revisions added some new functionalities to DSO 138 oscilloscope, or addressed some of the issues reported by users. Now, let's power up our oscilloscope and see what is number of our firmware revision on our device. When you power up oscilloscope, during booting process, for a short period of time, there is splash screen, with information about firmware number revision. In our case, the firmware version is marked 113-13801-042. From what we've learned previously, there is newer version of firmware, containing improvements and error fixes, so there is an update available. Before we proceed with demonstration, there are certain prerequisites that have to be met, for update process to succeed. First, the hardware requirements. For update process we will use UART connector on oscilloscope board. It is located at bottom of the board, left from USB connector. It contains 3 pins, GND, RX and TX. The GND stands for ground line, RX for receiver line, and TX for transmitter line. Simply put, RX receives data, TX transmits data, and GND is common ground line for board and computer. But how and where are we going to connect these pins to our computer? There are no GND, RX and TX ports on computer. Another piece of hardware we need is TTL to USB adapter. This piece of hardware will enable us to connect our oscilloscope to computer. These TTL to USB adapters on one end have GDN, TX and RX pins. Some versions contain additional pins, but these 3 are minimum what is required for connection. On the other end of adapter, is common USB connector. We will use 3 female to female DuPont wires to connect UART pins on oscilloscope board, to corresponding pins on our TTL to USB adapter. Pay attention that you need to cross RX and TX pins. This means, RX pin from oscilloscope board connects to TX pin on USB adapter, and TX pin from board goes to RX pin on adapter. The GND pins connects directly. There are also some software requirements. First, you will need to install drivers for TTL to USB adapter. Depending on type of adapter you have, some adapters already have drivers included in Windows installations. For others, you will have to manually download and install device drivers, using instructions provided by device manufacturer. Using Control Panel's Device Manager, check if your device is recognized and drivers installed. If not, you will need to install drivers manually from manufacturer website. Using Device Manager, make note what COM port number is assigned to TTL to USB adapter. Next, we need to download firmware from manufacturer website. And last, we need program to write new firmware onto device. For this demonstration we will use Flash Loader demo. Now that all of our software and hardware requirements are met, we can proceed to upgrade procedure. Before you proceed, make sure that you have an original DSO 138 device. If you are not sure, please watch our previous video. There, you will find information how to identify what type of board you have. If you do not have an original DSO 138 device, do not attempt this procedure. Also, it is best to perform firmware upgrade procedure before you enclose oscilloscope in protective case. If you have already enclosed oscilloscope, you will need to dismantle the entire case in order to access certain ports on board. Power up the oscilloscope and make note of splash screen during booting. Make sure you have original DSO 138 device. Also take note about firmware version currently installed. In our case, we have original DSO 138 device, with firmware version 042. Now, power down the oscilloscope. While oscilloscope is powered down, on the bottom side of board, locate JP1 and JP2 connectors. You will have to short circuit them in order to put oscilloscope into firmware upgrade mode. You can do this in couple of ways. One way is to solder connectors together. You can also use a small piece of aluminum foil and electric tape and make connection between pins. That way, you do not have to fuss with soldering, and after the upgrade is done, all you have to do is peel off the tape. You can use any procedure you feel comfortable with. In order to check if you have successfully short-circuited the connectors, power up the oscilloscope. This time, the screen should light up, but there shouldn't be any splash screen or device info. The screen should light up and remain blank. Take 3 female to female DuPont wires, and make connection between oscilloscope board and the adapter. First, connect GND pin from UART connector on board, to GND connector on adapter. Next, cross-connect RX and TX pins on board with TX and RX connectors on adapter. Now, plug the USB adapter to your computer or laptop. On computer side, first check if your TTL to USB adapter is recognized. For this particular device we are using in our demonstration, Windows 10 or 11 already have device drivers pre-installed. Check the device manager in Control Panel to verify that is so. Please take note what COM port number is assigned to your USB adapter. In our case, it is port number 9. If you have not so far, download and install Flash Loader demo. The install process is straightforward, so you should not have any problems with it. Run the program. If everything checks out all right, now you should be able to configure UART options. First, change port name to your assigned port number. In our case, it is port number 9. Next, set baud rate to 115,200. These settings just make everything go much faster, than default 9600 bauds. Leave all other settings to their default values. Click Next. If there is successful connection between oscilloscope and computer, you should see next window, with info that target is readable. On next screen, we see readout of oscilloscope's firmware. Now, it is always good practice to make backup of original firmware before proceeding to upgrade. In this case, if something goes wrong, we will always have a backup to restore from. Select Upload from Device Radio button, click Next, choose location and name of backup file, and proceed with backup process. You have successfully created backup of oscilloscope's original firmware. Close everything. Now, let's download new firmware from manufacturer's website. Download the archive and decompress it. We will put all our files on desktop. You can choose any other location, based on your work habits and preferences. The uncompressed file should be named 113-13801-061.hex. Make sure that the oscilloscope is powered up, connected to computer's USB port, via TTL to USB adapter, and that proper connection is made between UART port on board and adapter. The display should remain lit, but blank. Run Flash Loader Demo, again. This time, instead of making backup of existing firmware, we will upload our newly downloaded firmware file back to the oscilloscope. This time, choose Download to Device Radio button, select New Firmware File, adjust Extensions Display in order to see all files, and choose 113-13801-061.hex file. Check Verify after download checkbox. Click Next to proceed. You should see existing firmware being erased, and new one put in its place. After verification process is complete, click Finish. The upgrade process is complete now. Close Flash Loader Demo, power down the oscilloscope. Detach DuPont wires from UART connector. From bottom side of board, peel of the aluminum contacts from connectors JP1 and JP2. If you soldered the connectors, remove the solder. Now, power up the oscilloscope. If everything went well, you should see a new splash screen, with new firmware version, and warning from manufacturer about copyright infringement. These are some of the improvements and fixes added by every new version of the firmware. Please have in mind that firmware update procedure is not something to be taken lightly. In case of an error, or procedure interruption, you risk bricking your device for good. It would be prudent to watch this entire video tutorial before you proceed or attempt to upgrade firmware on your DSO 138 oscilloscope. Also have in mind that this video tutorial and steps taken to upgrade firmware relates only, and we repeat, only to genuine DSO 138 oscilloscope from JYE Tech. This procedure is not applicable to other DSO 138 devices, from other manufacturers. If you are not certain which device you own, please watch our previous video where we address the issue of genuine versus fake DSO 138 devices. Please, before you leave, show your appreciation by liking this video, sharing it, leaving a comment, and consider subscribing. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.